ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to get into something pretty important. And that's going to be the Prydwen tier list updates for version 2.4. And as you all might be familiar, there's been a new character released into the game, and we've had a chance to try her out, give her a bit of a spin, give some of our initial thoughts on the matter. And of course, I'm excited to see how she's shaking up the meta. And so with that, let's go ahead, let's start breaking it down, starting off with, of course, the changelog. On the 6th of June, or sorry, on the 12th of June, why are they not showing it in the American way? Cartethyia has shaken up the threshold for DPS characters by a good amount. Looks like she's a meta breaker. In the Tower of Adversity, that is. Her damage potential, on top of her ease of use, made us consider leaving her as the only tier 0 character, but from our current testing, especially keeping in mind that we aren't grading her using her signature weapon, we deem that it's too early to simply declare her that much of a level above everyone else, especially with DPS queens like Zani and Carlotta. Interesting. So according to their testing, she appears to be, with her sig, the best in the game. We'll see about that one. We will conduct further testing and see if the DPS rankings need a big shakeup in time for Lupa's release, but note that we don't expect it to happen. However, this is something for you to keep in mind. We welcome your feedback regarding Cartethia's performance as a DPS in her best team in relation to other characters. And I do believe that what they mean by her best team is her with Chikona as the sub DPS and then Arrow Rover as like the healer amplifier. And this testing might also be based off of the fact that we've gotten 2 more refinements of Arrow Rover's weapon. And so their arrow amplification abilities, right? I don't have them yet because I haven't gotten that far in the story. But Blood Pack's Pledge, right? What you're seeing over here. This bad boy, at rank 1, it only gives 10% arrow amp. But as you get more and more of the refinements, right? It goes up by 4% each level. So it's currently at 18% arrow damage amplification if you've completed the exploration and you got all those rewards. So that's just something to keep in mind here as well. So let's go ahead and let's keep going. Here are the Tower of Adversity tier list changes we chose to roll with. Boy, oh boy. Cartethyia is added as a tier 0 DPS. Cartethyia in her best team, under the right conditions, is the best DPS in the game in TOA. Bold, bold, bold claims. No sugarcoating here. Her damage numbers are extremely high on all of her abilities. She is self-sufficient to an extent. Completely self-sufficient with sequences, by the way, though this isn't considered in our tier list. Yeah, I do believe having Cartethyia at S2 basically removes her reliance on pretty much every other unit in her team. Like, you don't really need her to have a Chikona to apply arrow erosion because she'll already do it, and you won't need a Rover to increase the number of stacks of arrow erosion available because, well, she'll already do it. So, yeah, I think that's what they mean. Like, having her S2 does provide those pretty big bonuses. And while she does depend on teammates to activate her full potential, very true, under the right conditions, she'll tear even the strongest enemies apart in just a couple of rotations. Though, I think that's fair to say for every DPS in the game. Let's keep reading. Pair that with abilities to quick swap and work with even free-to-play teammates, and you have a DPS powerhouse capable of handling every situation, from single target to AoE. Like we explained before, she made us reconsider dropping every other DPS a tier below, but we're holding back on that now until we have properly tested her out and made sure she is absolutely a definite cut above the rest. Until then, rest assured, she's definitely a tier 0. So, some pretty bold claims being given out by Prydwen over here, in terms of her being, without a doubt, the best DPS in the game. I've personally tried her out with a Gust of Welkin set. I haven't farmed for her completely on, like, the best stuff ever. I also don't have her on a 4-4-1-1-1 set. And I have to say the results, while they were quite good, it seemed like her rotation was kind of long. And so while each rotation did do a lot of damage in her best in slot team, it felt like it took a long time to actually get that rotation going, especially relative to some other teammates and some other units on the roster. And I will say, against some enemies, she feels kind of fragile. I know she's an HP scaler, but I was using her against the TOA Crownless, and you know how Crownless in the second phase kind of goes like sicko mode and starts like attacking a shit ton? Cartethyia kind of really doesn't want to dodge. She just wants to like unload all of her damage. And I've definitely died a couple of times on fielding her in the fleur-de-lis form. Other units like Carlotta are definitely a lot easier to play and a lot more safe. Now we got the rankings for the other DPSs. Phoebe. She's down from tier 0 to tier 0.5. Phoebe as a DPS does not live up to the standards of tier 0 anymore due to Cartethyia, Zani, and Carlotta all being stronger than her. I think that's a fair one to say. I've never been like a whole fan of this idea that Phoebe's a tier 0. She's always felt like she's been like more utility focused and more of like a split sort of role, sort of character, so I've never really thought of her as like one of the best DPSs in the game. Kind of like more of like a flexible hybrid one that can just fill a lot of roles, but isn't really, you know, like the best one in the DPS category. This warrants her dropping down to tier 0.5, but note that she will be the strongest in that tier for most players. With Jinxie getting stronger, the more experienced the player is. I guess that's fair. Yeah, I guess that's fair. Chacona, DPS, getting added as a tier 1. Main DPS Chacona has been getting remarkable performance, particularly with San Juan Shorekeeper to buff her up. Similarly to Brant, she's a hybrid with good enough personal damage to be a surprisingly good main DPS, and with the same teammates as Brant too. I guess. I've had some okay success with her, but she is like a little bit sweaty to play as a main DPS because you got to make sure that you're doing all of her cancels properly. If not, you have a pretty significant DPS drop. I do agree with that though, that she is suitable as a main DPS, but maybe like an expert tag because you kind of gotta like, yeah, you got to do some stuff with her. Now we got Yinlin, tier 1 down to tier 1.5. Yeah, I think this is fair. I think it's fair to say Yinlin is the worst sub DPS in the game, and I feel like this sort of finalizes it. Yinlin has always had an issue of her signature weapon. She's one of the most signature-reliant characters in the game, as it complements her kit perfectly. In fact, Stringmaster is so good, it's always one of the best options on every rectifier damage dealer available. However, our tier list doesn't factor it into her rankings, which tanks down her performance. Additionally, with Zhang Liao going down a tier due to stronger DPS choices being available, on top of being a worse option than Chang Li at expert level, Yinlin is seeing less and less use. I think that's pretty fair to say. Nobody really uses the character anymore. I would dare say, even mention that I think Jian is a far better unit than Yinlin is, and probably has a lot more popularity than Yinlin does. Far from making her niche, but warranting a drop compared to other tier 1 hybrids who have cemented use cases. I remember at the release of the game, everybody, people were saying, oh, Yinlin's gonna be future-proof. With Yinlin's buff and all of that, yeah, there's no way, yeah, she's a way better investment than Jian. It turns out the opposite is actually what took place. Yeah, this unit is she's a little dated. I think she needs a bit of a buff. Cantarella, tier 1 down to tier 1.5. Oh dear. Similarly to Yinlin, Cantarella is a character who struggles to find a position in the meta. Her rotation is lengthy, her damage is high, but not much higher than other hybrids, and her ultra buffs are yet to see good use. Yep, she is only usable in a Jinxie team at this moment in time. She is only usable in a Jinxie team, and in some of those circumstances, Jeja's just better because Jeja gives Jinxie energy, while Cantarella only just provides kind of meaningless CC and a little bit more damage than Jeja. She is for now going down to tier 1.5, but rest assured that when a DPS who can properly use her Havoc skill ultra buffs in the future, she will rise up in those tiers. I think this is a fair take for one main reason, right? Let's be honest here, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I forgot that she just uses her puppet. Okay, Cantarella right now, her outro skill buff has gentle tentacles. Yeah, it has absolutely close to no use case in the game. Nobody really uses a full Havoc damage and skill damage boost. They only use one part of it. And so the end result is that, yeah, this character was released several patches before having a best-in-slot partner. Jinxie is still a very, very good use case with her, but with her basically sharing the role with Jeja, Cantarella's only use on your account currently is if you have Carlotta and Carlotta's using Jeja, and then Jinxie will use Cantarella, but you also have to be using them at the exact same time, because otherwise you can just, you know, use Jeja with Carlotta in one team, and then Jeja with Jinxie on the other team. So it's like, it's a very, very limited use case to actually get a lot of value from Cantarella on your account, at least currently in the game. So I think this is fair. Now we got Yang Yang, tier 1.5 down to tier 2. After playing her more extensively over time, players have realized that Yang Yang is by no means a bad character. True. However, she's dropping to tier 2. Why? Because tier 2 is the start of the niche characters bracket, and Yang Yang has always been a replacement option when certain characters weren't available. We see this with units like Zhang Liao, Chang Li, and Carlotta, and so on. The niche use case describes her belonging to the niche character bracket much more, which is why she's dropping. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not sure if I necessarily agree with this one too much. I think her being a replacement for like the premium options that serves, you know, maybe like 80, 70, 80, 90% efficiency kind of like is enough for her to be in tier 1.5 because, well, I'm gonna be honest here, right? It's like, I don't think there's a lot of units in tier 1.5 anyways. Maybe she's like tier 2 with the expert tag or something like that, but I don't know if she warrants a drop by that much. All right, now we got John Shin, tier 2 down to tier 3. Kind of big. We won't sugarcoat it. John Shin is basically Yang Yang, but just worse. They have similar grouping capabilities, if not Yang Yang's being stronger as multiple abilities can group, not just the ultimate. And John Shin has a much longer rotation, John Shin's energy regeneration is awkward, and her ultra buff is powerful, but her kit works against herself to access it. Yeah, her concerto generation is fucking slow. John Shin sees practically no use and has always had better replacements, hence why she's dropping to tier 3. She's okay at S6, but that requires a lot of investment to get there. Hopefully someday we get a Liberation main DPS who can use her well, but that is unlikely to happen, unfortunately. Hey, just wait for, Chu Yan. Yeah, I bet he's gonna be a Liberation DPS. Sure thing. Now I got Rover Arrow. Tier 3 to tier 1 with the partner tag added. Arrow Rover is finally usable, just only with one character. Cartethyia is one of the most imposing DPS characters in the meta, and her kit's nature makes Arrow Rover work brilliantly with her. True. That's just because Arrow's Rover capability to increase the maximum number of arrow erosion stacks present on enemies allows Cartethyia to make full use of her kit's potential. And she also has that wind string boost to the forte circuit of Arrow Rover built into her inherent skills. It actually lets Arrow Rovers skip a basic attack that they would normally use in their rotation, as well as skip a plunge. Arrow Rover, however, is just as clunky, still deals little damage, and still eats up more field time than they probably should. For these reasons, they're going up to tier 1 with the partner tag to describe their reliance on Cartethyia to do anything useful. You can consider them tier 3 without Cartethyia available. Well, I mean, maybe when they get their R5 weapon, they'll see use in like non-Cartethyia teams just as like a general arrow buffer, but we'll see. We'll see. Just wait for that R5 weapon. And now, here are the Whimpering Waste changes now that we've covered the TOA. Cartethyia is added as a tier 0.5 DPS. In WhiWa, Cartethyia has a bit of an issue keeping arrow erosion stacks up on enemies when she kills full waves before the next one spawns. This happens fairly often. However, Cartethia's damage is still monstrous, and she can one-shot multiple waves of enemies per rotation. But by nature of her lengthy rotation, which has a lot of damage concentrated in a single ability, this favors her less in WhiWa than Tower. Hence, she'll place in tier 0.5 on this tier list. You heard that first, ladies and gentlemen. Cartethyia is worse than Jian. That's the evidence right there, ladies and gentlemen. The evidence is right here, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that's a fair one, because she relies on arrow erosion to be on enemies. And, well, if you kill them, the arrow erosion disappears. And a big part of Cartethia's kit is having high stacks of arrow erosion on the enemies to deal more and more damage. And even if you have Chakona on the team, to give out, one stack of arrow erosion every second while off field, that's not going to allow Cartethyia to reach her, 40, 50, 60% plus additional damage that she gets from having multiple stacks on the enemies. This is kind of like the mechanic that they're talking about over here. I'll show it off to you guys. Because clearly there are some people in the chat that don't seem to fundamentally understand how Cartethia's kit even works. She has an inherent skill over here. Targets with 1 to 3 stacks of arrow erosion take 30% more damage. And then targets with more than 3 stacks additionally take 10% more, so she can go up to 60% more damage, but that requires them to have 6 stacks of erosion on them. And believe me when I say, in Whimpering Waste, ladies and gentlemen, you are not getting 6 stacks on any of the fucking enemies there. That's just not gonna happen. And secondly, you have her big other attack, right? Dear God, this is the longest ability in the game. Y'all see this? Upon hitting a target, remove all stacks of arrow erosion on the target. Each stack removed amplifies the damage taken by the targets by 20%, up to 5 stacks. You're also never getting the full benefit of this amplification in WhiWa either. And so, by nature of Cartethia's kit design, even Chakona, with her off-field arrow erosion application, can't really guarantee that Cartethyia is going to gain all the damage bonuses that she wants. That's just how it's going to work. And so I think it makes sense that she's not that great in the game mode. She will, destroy shit in the Tower of Adversity, but I don't think she's actually going to be that good in Whimpering Waste. But that's just the thing, ladies and gentlemen. That's just how it is. Chakona as a main DPS was an idea mostly explored in WhiWa, and for good reason. She's amazingly potent in the game mode as a main DPS thanks to her low reliance on her ultimate, her amazing energy generation paired with a low cooldown ultimate, good AoE and grouping capabilities, as well as damage which is spread out over her whole rotation instead of concentrated on a few abilities. For these reasons, she performs excellently in the game mode and can net amazing scores, securing a spot in tier 0.5. I think that's fair. Yeah, Chakona has no cooldown on their Forte circuit. Her Liberation can be immediately canceled after casting it. It like one-shots a wave for fun. And yeah, I mean, the unit is quite good. She's probably one of the best WhiWa characters in existence, both as like a sub-DPS enabler for a Phoebe, as well as a main DPS. Yeah, when I'm using her with Phoebe, she'll like wipe out 2 waves on her own, by herself, just to enable Phoebe's Spectro Frazzle application. Yeah, the character is like probably one of the best WhiWa picks I can think of. Now we got Zhang Liao, tier 0.5 down to tier 1. Zhang Liao is really strong, in particular with Chang Li. The issue, Chang Li has Brand as a much better performing teammate. True. And Chang Li takes care of most of the scoring. True. Which she could do even with Sanhua backing her up instead of Zhang Liao. Also true. Additionally, Zhang Liao and Yinlin have yet to see better performances than characters such as Havoc, Rover, and Rosia, and DPS Brand. And meanwhile, the performance compared to other tier 0.5 characters just doesn't match. For these reasons, he's a better fit for tier 1. I think that's fair. He runs into situations where his hypercubes don't end up clearing a wave, and if you ever have to use 2 hypercubes as Zhang Liao for 1 wave, you're cooked in the game mode. If your hypercubes end up keeping the enemies alive with like 20%, 10% of their HP, his next hypercube is like completely wasted if it's used to finish them off. So it's a little bit rough. Next up, we got Sanhua going from tier 0.5 to tier 0. Sanhua is amazing, not just in the tower. With Chakona main DPS seeing use in WhiWa, with Jian able to harness the power of a 16-second ultimate cooldown thanks to Sanhua, being one of the strongest options with the strongest character Camellia, as well as being extremely flexible going into teams such as free-to-play Cartethyia, DPS Brant, and even fucking Encore. For players willing to put up with her short range, Sanhua has earned herself a spot into tier 0 in WhiWa as well. I haven't really seen the Encore clears, but I guess if she's usable with this many teams and is able to elevate even some of the worst WhiWa picks into people that can actually clear, then yeah, I guess it's fine. I guess it works out. I guess it's something that people can do. Her low rotation time and modest damage output in exchange for that low rotation time is, I mean, it just works, right? It just works. Yinlin, placed on the watch list. Yinlin is being placed on the watch list to potentially go into tier 1.5 due to her performance mainly lying in characters such as Zhang Liao and Jinxi, both being absent of the Apex tiers, the top rated ones. We'll be conducting more extensive testing as usual with characters on the watch list. We ask for your opinion and feedback regarding what we should do with her. Just drop her down to tier 2. Yeah, Yinlin just at this point needs to be dropped down to like a level where people can recognize she's one of the worst limited units in the game. When her banners come up, she's one of the worst picks you can make as a player nowadays. I don't think there's any circumstance where you actually want her on your account in like in the middle of 2025. I would say pulling her is tantamount to like low-key breaking your account because almost everybody else is a better option. Literally, I cannot think of any character that is a worse option than Yinlin to pull on. I'm being genuinely honest here. I feel like every other limited character is a higher value pick than Yinlin. What limited 5-star is lower value than Yinlin? Just let me know. Alright, mods, ban everybody that just said Gion. Rover Spectro as a support, tier 1.5 to tier 1. Zani and DPS Phoebe have both risen in the previous WhiWa tier list iterations, so Spectro Rover as their support was bound to rise as well. This is like not using a Shorekeeper, not using a Farina, using Spectro Rover on Rejuvenating Glow as the healer. While S-Rover as a hybrid is only used for free-to-play Zani and Phoebe teams that don't properly function. True. As a support, they're a staple of Phoebe Kachona and Zani Phoebe team compositions, cementing their position in tier 1. We are potentially considering rising them up to tier 0.5 in light of DPS Phoebe, plus Chakona, and Zani Phoebe being some of the best WhiWa team compositions. However, we deem this unnecessary due to Shorekeeper displaying similar performance. Fair. But please let us know if we should bump them up even higher. I think you can bump them up higher to maybe tier 0.5, but make sure you put the partner tag. Tier 0.5 with the partner tag, because Shorekeeper belongs in tier 0, right? Due to her ability to support almost pretty much every single team in the game. And Spectro Rover would only be a high value pick with the partner tag. And so, yeah, you could probably maybe even put Spectro Rover in like tier 0 with the partner tag as well. That's just something to think about. You have the tag, so you might as well use it. Rover Arrow, tier 3 to tier 1.5 with the partner tag added. Well, I mean, you can sort of see here, right? You just said they're only usable with Phoebe Chakona or Zani Phoebe. And so, but now we have the partner tag over here. You kind of see what's going on, right? Honestly, we were somewhat hesitant on placing Arrow Rover anywhere above tier 2, even with Cartethia's release, due to how impossibly clunky they are against smaller enemies, to a point where it's difficult to even land their mid-air attacks at all. Very true. You just kind of miss everything and never charge their Forte circuit. However, we couldn't ignore how good Cartethyia is, so similar to our TOA reasoning, we're placing them in tier 1.5 with a partner tag. We'll be doing more extensive testing to see if this clunkiness truly makes them near unusable or not, and finalizing their placement in the next tier list update. The thing with Arrow Rover is that when you do their skill attack, they literally will just miss enemies. It's almost comical how bad this air attack is. Right here. It'll just miss them. Like, you'll just fly over their heads and won't land your attacks because they're, like, on the ground. And so maybe if, like, the hitboxes and stuff are adjusted, that'll be something to, you know, factor in more. But yeah, the character's a little interesting against smaller enemies for sure. So I like that foresight. I like that thought that Prydwen's putting into it over there. Now that we've taken a look at the overall changelog, let's just get right on into the actual tier list itself. And boy, oh boy, I think a lot of people might be a little bit shocked once they see everything that's actually going on over here. And we're going to talk about the major changes. Frankly, being honest, we might just skip over the hybrid category because nothing has been updated there. In the DPS section, we're seeing over here, we're going to have our Carlottas, our Chaconas, and our Zanis up in tier 0. And I have to say, especially considering this is a TOA ranking, I think this is fair. I think this is fine because Carlotta has some of the highest damage in the game while also basically ensuring that all of her damage is completely guaranteed. I think the main reason for why Fleur-de-Lis or Cartethyia shouldn't really over-exceed them is that Fleur-de-Lis, Cartethyia, has to be one of the most fragile teams in the game. I'm going to be honest. This character is heavily disincentivized from dodging. She's almost designed in a way to just face tank attacks to be able to get her rotation off. Otherwise, she ends up extending her rotation an excessive amount. And if you end up dodging with her, you'll like cancel the very carefully planned rotation you had in your head. You won't end up like using the arrow erosion attacks that you want to do to like, to like consume the stacks and guarantee and like, you know, actually do the damage you want to do in Fleur-de-Lis form. And the end result is that you will die a lot using this unit. And it's not even like Zani either, where Zani has like built-in parries that she can use to like continue her combo. If you parry with Zani during her liberation, you'll still consume the blaze. You'll still end up dealing damage. If you dodge and like extend your rotation playing Fleur-de-Lis, you will mess up the attacks that you're trying to do. Especially when stuff like your mid-air 2 is the one that consumes the erosion and deals the damage. Her basic attack 5 is the one that consumes the erosion and deals the damage. She has a lot of advanced forwards built into her kit in Fleur-de-Lis form, where performing certain attacks in a certain order will allow you to get to the next one faster. And those next ones that you get to faster are the ones that end up dealing damage. And I think it makes sense that she's actually HP scaling because of that, because boy, oh boy, if she was not, this character would be dropping like a fly really, really, really often. I think that alone, her fragileness, how exposed she is to like getting interrupted, getting hit, and you know, not interrupted in the sense that she gets hit and then her attack chain stops. It's she gets hit and dies. And it's a very, very common thing. Moving down to tier 0.5, we got Camellia, Jinxie, with Jinxie potentially going up to tier 0 with Sweaty Play, and Phoebe. I think that this is fine. I've always been of the opinion that Phoebe's damage output hasn't really been as powerful as other units, and so I was always a little bit shocked as to why she was in tier 0 in the first place. So seeing her drop down to tier 0.5 to me is what makes a little bit more sense. I would frankly even say, if like damage is the main factor that we're talking about, well, I mean, I feel like she doesn't out-damage a lot of these guys either. But then again, these calculations are being done without signature. I would be interested to see like what the rankings would be like with all of these characters on their signature weapons. I feel like she would, maybe that's the real reason why I think she doesn't really stand out among the rest, is I have every character signature weapon, or at least the DPS ones. And it feels like she doesn't really exceed a lot of the other main DPSs with that qualification. But without SIGs, sure, I guess it makes sense. Now, let's get into tier 1. Boy, oh boy, there are a lot of characters in tier 1. I'm gonna be real here, though. What is Jian doing here? I guarantee you, Jian is doing more damage than the Chacona main DPS. What is going on here? He does more damage than a Chacona main DPS. at this point, Huh? I don't think the sub DPS Chakota as a main DPS is dealing more damage than a Jian. I'm going to be honest. Is this only because he's technically on the standard Broadblade and then she's on Static Mist, which has crit? Is that the real differentiation over here? Is that genuinely it? Because, I mean, otherwise it's like, I mean, every Broadblade character should kind of suck then, right? Because their standard weapon is dog shit. I mean, it's just, when I see this, I'm just like, okay, there's clearly something is a little bit off here when I'm seeing this. Because Chakota as a main DPS is like not that good. It's not that powerful. Zhang Liao with the expert tag makes sense. Havoc Rover kind of because they're clunky and kind of feel like poo-poo. Sure. Encore, she's a standard unit. Brant, honestly, I feel like could be bumped up with his SIG because he's one of the best main DPSs in the game with his SIG. Sure. But Gian, okay, I don't know if I can reason with this too much. Now we got Danjin in tier 1.5. She's just holding down the fort. I mean, it is what it is. And now we got the reject squad over here. Nobody plays these units unless they're on 0 ping or you know, they're a furry. So we'll just leave them here for now. And Alto just sucks. Moving on. It looks like the main change that we've had to the sub DPS tier list is everyone over here has been staying pretty consistent, and Yinlin and Cantarella have been dropped down over to tier 1.5. I think that this is a little bit hasty for Cantarella. I feel like Cantarella's performance in her Jinsei team is still good enough to warrant her being in tier 1. Yinlin kind of is not the optimal choice. She's one of the worst options in every single team that she's on, while Cantarella is a best in slot for Jinsei. And so I kind of view Cantarella's downgrading as a little bit excessive here, especially considering how bad Yinlin is. I think Cantarella should stay in tier 1. I think she should move back, but Yinlin in tier 1.5, I actually completely agree with it. I don't think there's any reason for her to be dropping down this far over here when Jeja is a tier 0, and she compares to Jeja in the Jinsei teams. That's just my point of view. Everybody else, Johnshin and Yang Yang being dropped down, yeah, probably because they didn't want Yang Yang in here, you know, kind of interfering with the whole setup that they have. So I would say move Cantarella up, and this tier list is good. And in the support category, Arrow Rover is now just back, and that's assuming that they're being used with Cartethyia, because otherwise they're kind of a piece of dog shit. But with their weapon gaining more and more refinements, like we just said, maybe they'll be better in the future on some Arrow teams with, like, you know, a Chakota main DPS or a Gian over here. So that'll be that one. Now let's go ahead and get into the WhiWa tier list. So remember what I said before, ladies and gentlemen? Yeah, Gian is still better than Cartethyia, losers. Boom. Boom. That's what I meant by it. Yeah, I don't really think she's that good in Whimpering Wastes. Because, like we all just talked about when it came to her mechanics, she requires a lot of stacks to be on the enemies to deal damage to them. And in Whimpering Wastes, where you're facing multiple waves of enemies and their stacks are getting obliterated and you can't maintain uptime on them, then, well, you're going to run into an issue dealing the damage that you feel like you should with Cartethyia. So, I mean, yes, Gian is going to be better than her in that content. I know that's a tough pill for some people to swallow, but that's just fundamentally how this character's kit is designed, you bozos. That's just how it is designed. There's not really much you can do about it. And so, yeah, I think that the fact that Kuro has gone ahead and been able to manage a lot of the quote-unquote power creep, in the sense that the only character that is top tier in both game modes is technically Zani, but Zani has that trade-off of if you don't have Phoebe with that team and enabling that lineup, I feel like she's definitely not top tier in both of the game modes. And when it comes to the other characters, right, you're seeing people like Chang Li, main DPS, Gian, Camellia up here, you know, just dominating tier 0, and they're not really close to that peak in the TOA. So, yeah, we're seeing some big differentiations. Pretty good balancing overall. Rosia solo handling tier 0 in the sub DPS category with Sanhua, while Varita and Shorekeeper are just, you know, universally good. So it is what it is over there. I would have to say, yeah, the other rankings make a ton of sense to me. Chakona as the main DPS. Yeah, her lower damage relative as a main DPS doesn't really matter too much in WhiWa. It's more of her uptime and constant ability to use that heavy attack, which is solid. Phoebe with Chakona, definitely a tier 0.5. Carlotta, she still works, though I do feel like Carlotta's really mob and spawn dependent. For example, if you use Carlotta in the WhiWa floor with the roast rooms, I think you're fucked. I'm going to be honest. I think you're completely fucked if you're using her against the Rostrum enemies, because they don't group up together and she's going to get fucking ruined. So I think she's mob dependent. I think depending on the future design, we'll just have to see what it looks like from there. What the hell? Did somebody post like a love story on here? What the fuck even is that? Okay, I'm just gonna pretend I didn't see that. So now we got this whole situation going on. We talked about why Cartethyia isn't the best unit ever. Let's look at the meta characters right now. Changelog dropping down makes quite a bit of sense. Brant still over here as a main DPS. I think depending on your investment, if your anchor is able to one-shot multiple waves, I think he might actually be worthy of being higher. Though him as a sub DPS up here is pretty solid, especially with him supporting Changli. I would say, yeah, there's not been too many updates to the WhiWa tier list overall. I think Jinxie being down over here is still perfectly fine because she is a character with a lot of flaws in the game mode. And you know, she does perform a lot better in the TOA in the hands of most players. Let me see when it comes to the meta characters. I think maybe the Prydwen tier list owners, maybe whoever's in charge, I think they hate Cantarella. I feel like, I know I always talk about how I don't like her. I don't think she's this bad though. Like tier 1.5 on both lists? Bro, I feel like they hate her. I feel like they legitimately hate her. Like, maybe her boobs are too big, brother. I mean, I personally, I don't like playing her. I feel like she's clunky to use, but I don't feel like her overall strength is this overwhelmingly bad to be tier 1.5 on both lists. I feel like this is a little bit nuts. I think Spectre Rover can go into tier 0.5 with the partner tag. They don't have it right now. And I think, yeah, Arrow Rover in tier 1.5 because they literally can't land their hits. I think that's fine as well. I think Yinlin and Cantarella should trade spots. Yeah, I think Cantarella should go into tier 1. I think Yinlin should go into tier 1.5. I think that would be my main takeaway from the WhiWa list over here. The last thing we'll do is just take a quick look at maybe what their Cartethyia page is looking like. Let's just look at the review over here. Let's look at the pros and cons. I'm excited to see what the overall takes are. Best DPS in the game in her best team with optimal conditions, period. We'll see. We'll see about that one. Built-in interruption resistance. Once inputs are learned, her rotation is near impossible to fail. Well, she does have the downside of getting killed by the enemies. You gotta factor that in as well. Against hard-hitting enemies, believe me, I feel like you try to use this Cartethyia unit in holograms, you're gonna want to do something in Minecraft. You use this unit in holograms, you're actually going to want to do something in Minecraft. I'm not even joking. Self-sufficient. She heals allies, applies and amplifies arrow erosion, making her able to exploit her kit by herself, albeit not to its full potential. That's true. Difficult to hit, as a good chunk of her rotation is spent in the air. That's what you would think. But there are a lot of enemies that will be able to hit her. Able to stagnate and group enemies in the fleur-de-lis form. Lots of swap cancel windows. Room for optimization and quick swap. DPS is so good at a baseline that even without her best team and weapons, she'll still slap anything in her way with good echoes. Isn't that any unit in the game, though? Increases teammate interruption resistance and healing. Funnels forte points to Arrow Rover if present. Makes team rotations much smoother. I would almost view that more as a con, that Arrow Rover is so horrifically designed, they only feel good when they're with Cartethyia. Insane. Okay, insane. That's true. Now we got very expensive, teammate reliant, signature weapon reliant, and even buffed by teammate signature weapons. Requires your other characters to adopt unconventional builds. Herself being built unconventionally as she scales off HP. Be prepared to dump a lot of resources into this character to unleash her full potential, without the possibility to share her build with anyone else. She's like a fucking Bugatti, bro. Can have difficulties keeping arrow erosion stacked up in AoE scenarios if she kills all the enemies at once. True. In-game descriptions are 3 times longer to read than our in-depth review. It's time to make proper use of the shortened description feature you implemented, Kuro. Yeah, I see it. Yeah, I see it. Yeah, I think that pros and cons list was actually pretty solid. Good humor in this one as well. I gotta say, this Prydwen update as a whole, I feel like there are some relatively extremely bold claims made into here. I feel like, as a whole, you probably could have leaned into a lot more of the downsides of this unit in that, like, she's got some really, really, really interesting handicaps in her playstyle. Based off the whole, you want to make sure you're going through her whole rotation and doing all of her advances. And if you end up dodging and you end up doing all of this other stuff, you will, like, kind of mess up the intended rotation that you're trying to do with this character. And if you do, her DPS has a lot of issues actually getting, you know, fully enabled. And the other thing is that I know we mentioned that she has interruption resistance and she can be hard to hit. Brother, I don't know. I feel like against like the Dragon of Dirge, you enter like your air state, bro's gonna fuck you up. I feel like there are a lot of characters, a lot of enemies that will fuck up Cartethyia completely while she's trying to do her rotation. And the interruption resistance can also be a double-edged sword in that you'll just tank multiple hits that you would normally get staggered and gain, you know, like some invulnerability frames from, and you could just die. And I feel like that is something that a lot of players have yet to experience while they're using this unit, and it's going to be extremely prevalent in content like the holograms. So I think that there are a lot of asterisks when it comes to Cartethia's performance that players will soon start discovering as time goes on. But yeah, overall, I would say a lot of the changes make sense, but there might be a little bit too much hate for Cantarella. I don't think she's a tier 1.5 level of bad in every single game mode. Let me know what you all think, ladies and gentlemen. Peace.